Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Reach. In today's episode, we're going to be talking a little bit about college admissions, finding the right college, and really just some advice about the college experience.
That's right. Now, in a longitudinal study that was reported back in 2011, only about 38.8% of autistic undergraduate students actually graduate from college, which is a bit of an abysmal statistic. The graduation statistic is lower than those of other disabilities, which is 40.7%. So not much lower, but lower.
Wow. Why do you think that is from your perspective?
From my perspective, the frustration of being the students that are always thinking outside the box and don't understand the standard way of being taught
Yeah.
and don't fall into that category, nor do we necessarily want to understand the standard way of being taught because we have our own ways that work for us. We have our ways in, and it's just finding those schools that are open to accepting that fact and working with that fact.
I can see that. I remember just going to college and I remember, you know, for me, when I was trying to find the right college, I was trying to find a college that met what I needed in terms of my academia. I needed a college at the time that because I was going to school for journalism when I was going through my undergrad. And I knew that the school that I wanted to go to had the one of the best journalism programs in the entire country. But I also had to learn with that, there are some growing pains. Class sizes really matter. The type of instruction really matters. The type of testing really matters. There's a lot of things that you have to consider when you're selecting the right college and, setting yourself up for success so you can get a graduate degree, whether that be a bachelor's or a master's degree.
The other side of it is finding within yourself like what it is you want to do, which is really hard sometimes coming out of high school where you have no experience into other things except for here's math, history, science, English. I have so much homework. I don't have time for anything else except for my special interests. And that's the part of the key that helped me try to find the right college is tapping into my younger uh, special interest of drawing was one of my first ways into finding a good college was just here we go. Granted, I've been through several different schools, so there are times where like, oh, I'll try this because this trend is happening right now and I'll see if I can get into it, but it just didn't really work out for me or like I bear witness to the theory and I'm like, why are there like six different theories for the same topic? Why don't they agree? You're going to
Gotta
make
love
my brain hurt. So I'm out. That's another reason for like switching like what I'm studying or like it for me it always went back to art.
I understand that. So I stayed at the same college for, well, really 3.5 years. I graduated with my degree in 3.5 years because I wanted to get school done. I didn't care about my summer breaks. I was just like, you know what? Let's just get ahead because honestly, I wanted to prove to myself that I could do it. And so for me, I did I was always stuck on journalism, specifically photojournalism. That was going to be my major no matter what. But what I ended up changing a lot was my minors. I wanted to do TCOM, telecommunications. I even wanted a double major at one point. Then I decided, you know what? No, I don't want to do that. That's too much. Then I wanted a minor um in French. And then I decided no, didn't want to do that either. It was too much. I did end up getting a minor in sociology and in digital publishing because those were two very great interests of mine. Sociology because it led me to actually going into a graduate degree of doing ABA, applied behavior analysis. But then my digital publishing minor really fell into my photojournalism degree. And so I would constantly have this battle of like, oh my gosh, I really love this class. Maybe I want to minor in it. Maybe I want to major in it. And then it's like the next class happens and then maybe not so much because it's too much. Or, maybe the way that this is being done in the industry is not the way that I would have wanted it to be done, which ironically, I'm not even in journalism. I'm not doing a journalism type of job. I work as a board certified behavior analyst nowadays, and my degree is in behavior analysis. So it's kind of interesting how the tables have absolutely turned, and now I'm doing something completely different from my baccalaureate.
And it's usually how it goes. You go in for one thing and you come out something else.
Hmm.
And that's part of the scary process of actually choosing the right college is, okay, this is going to decide the fate of my life. And I don't know if I like this enough to pursue it, or I don't know if this college is going to support me in that, or what's going to happen. And it's like that wanting to make that right choice, and that right choice that might be maybe pleasing your parents, or right choice to like, okay, I'll just do it because I should go to college. Towards the end of high school, I was told that I should go to college because the trend was that if you don't go to college, you would never go. Like, I am proof that is false. Like, I thrive in the academic environment, so I will always go back. Like, that's just the way I am. Um, but the fact that like adults around me were telling me, so they kind of encouraged me to go immediately after high school, and I didn't feel ready. And that is part of the other thing that is a common trend among students on the spectrum going to college is that transitional period from the high school to college, and the difference of, oh, you're on your own, you have to manage your finances, you have to manage your food, you have to cook for yourself, you have to clean for yourself, you have to do your laundry. Can you do all these things and navigate a social environment and possibly have a roommate?
From the social perspective, it was just a blast, and I say that very sarcastically.
Yeah,
You know, I,
my first university was just that.
academically speaking, it was fine. You know, I was able to get through my classes. I was able to do really well. I always stayed above a 3.0. I never quite made a 4.0, but I always made at least a 3.0 GPA. But when it came to the social and the roommate situation, whew, living with another person, that's
Yeah,
all I'm gonna
that's a
say.
that's a good topic for another episode. uh,
Exactly. Exactly. No, but socially speaking, I was able to make some friends in college, but the problem was, when you're leaving your hometown. So I went to a 4-year university. I graduated in 3.5 years, but I went to a state university. And basically, like, I was required to move because my college was over an hour and a half away. I also had to live on campus because I couldn't afford to have an apartment. Also, with my experience, I had a job that required me to live on campus. I was a night security person. And so, financially speaking, I was able to kind of get through everything because, I had a job every single semester. But that being said, the transition away from home to school was definitely very, very hard. I remember being homesick after like an hour of just my mom leaving the campus. I was like, wait a minute, this is really weird. How come this is happening? Like, I feel like I should be at home right now. I had no friends. I had, no one to really talk to for like my first week. And as I got into my major and as I started to get to know people better, it got easier. But that being said, it really took having to like put myself out there, and I'm not generally the most comfortable with like, putting myself out there in that regard. I had to mask. I had to please other people. I had to sort of like appease them in that sense because if I didn't appease my peers, then I was going to become the target of bullying, which I know we had an episode about bullying, but it goes right back to it.
yeah, it sucks that like bullying still continues on, and it's trying to navigate out of that, okay, high school mindset into adulthood. And like for me personally, I would have loved to have that gap year where I could have like made sure I found myself, made sure I had everything I needed ready to go to college, that I was ready for that point. Like I ended up going to a university and leaving it after like a semester, and then I literally did get to take my gap year after that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So and ended up going to community college, which is still a strongly recommended choice for people, whether it's for finance reasons. But one of the main reasons would be to look at those just to get your core classes out of the way, get your math, your science, all those other classes done. So when you actually go on to a longer degree, you can just go, okay, I've got these classes done, take these transfer credits from this other school, and I'm going to focus on what I actually am here for.
What was taking a gap year like for you?
Uh, well, one, getting my driver's license was one of them, and that's a topic for another episode too.
True. True.
But yeah, that's what I spent most of that year doing was working on my driver's license and just figuring out what I want to do and where to go after that.
Yeah.
And I think it was might have worked part time during that time period too.
I asked because I know people who took gap years. I didn't personally take a gap year because I kind of felt like I just needed to get done. I needed to get my degree and just pursue my job. And then, because I was originally going to stop at bachelor's degree. And then for me, I wasn't happy doing photojournalism. I found myself just being like, this is like the field that I was going into almost turned into like yellow journalism, sensationalism. It was just, it was not what I wanted it to be. And also the job market for journalism is extremely competitive. And
Mm,
for me, that was really tough. That was a tough pill to swallow. I've applied to over like maybe 75 jobs at the time,
wow.
and I didn't get a bite. Yeah, I had one internship and that was it. And it was like, I had to go back and live with my mom, and it put me through like a lot of depression. But then I fell in love with what I'm doing now because I did a volunteer week over with one of my old speech therapists who actually ran a social skills group at a private clinic, and I fell in love with it. I thought it was just the best experience and I wanted to continue doing that. And so for me, um, I was going to stop at bachelor's, leave it at that. But then I was like, you know what? No, I actually want to go for my master's degree. I want to go into behavior analysis. And I didn't realize it was behavior analysis until actually having to look for the right school. And looking for the right school matters because you want to make sure, at least like from my experience, I found that for me, in order for me to find the right school, you had to really make sure that it was the right major. And it was also a matter of really finding what is the best modality, which at the time was online learning. And online learning actually worked out really, really well for me because I could, do my classes. It was self-paced. There was no actual like lecture. I just had, this whole like list of assignments that I had to do, and I could work. And
Yeah.
I was able to balance it out. Not everyone can do that, but that was what made me as like that was what helped me end up getting my master's degree, essentially.
Okay. Yeah, that's something to consider with schools. It's looking at class dynamics, class sizes. I've been in lecture halls, I've been in studio classes, I've been in online classes. I've had classes where they would sit outside and have their lecture. I'm like, I've seen quite a bit, and like I'm the like I'm one that if you can give me everything that I need to do ahead of time, I will just get it done.
Same, same.
But
I did a sociology class in 2 weeks just because I had all the assignments at my hand, and all I had to do was like 5 papers and that was it. Like it was easy. I was able to do that, knock it out, and then they emailed me 2 weeks later, "Hey, you got an A in the course." It's like, "Oh, okay, great, thanks."
yeah, but back to the topic of like looking for the right school. Yes, you want to consider like um, their graduation rates, which you could find online. You
Yep.
can find like the resumes of the instructors that work there, where what they've done, where they've been, uh, what a current alumni have done. You could even reach out to schools and ask to talk to alumni. Some schools will let you do that, or even talk to the program leads. Though some schools are a little hesitant on that, and they'll just go, "We'll do it once." I would recommend just looking for someone that is open to talk to you and also trying to find a school that is willing to work with any reasonable adjustments slash accommodations that you might need to succeed academically. And that dynamic from high school to college is a little different when it comes to your rights as a student with autism, because you have to advocate for yourself in college a lot more than they'll advocate for you. Though that's depending on the school, they may have people there to help advocate with you. It's still more on you than you probably originally have been exposed to.
Yeah, disability accessible services are, that really does matter when you go into college. I remember actually, um, within my college, we had a access department, and I actually had a job with them doing a note-taking position. And it was because there were people that were in a few of my classes who could not write. They had a very difficult time with being able to transcribe information. And I remember taking a job for two different note-taking positions, one in a journalism class and one in a French class. And I just remember for me how great it was to be able to have that, but at the same time, I also, on the flip side, remember how hard it was for them to even get somebody to be able to transcribe notes for them and um be able to really like work with them too. That was also something that I really found was quite challenging. And that department, while it was very helpful, I mean, Conrad's right. You have to do a lot more advocating when you're in college. No one's going to advocate for you. Or, if you have someone that advocates for you, it's going to take a lot more than what it was like in high school, middle school, elementary school. It takes a lot more than that. So having the right disability accessible services at the right college really matters, especially because advocacy is going to happen so much more at a higher level.
Agreed. And part of that advocacy is like a lot of open communication with professors. Fun statistic to also be aware of. This comes from I don't know the exact numbers for it, but the movie Autism Goes to College. I highly recommend it. They have a statistic in their movie about how um, most colleges don't require their professors to be trained in working with neurodivergent students, and it is something they themselves have been working to try to change and make aware. And there are some universities that have been trying to do that. My last school had its own Office of Neurodiversity that was actually going out and training professors.
That's awesome. Unfortunately, I'm not too surprised by that, if I'm being completely honest. And the reason why I'm not so surprised by that is because even though I didn't necessarily need a lot of the services that the disability accessible services at my college really like had, I remember there was one situation in which I had to advocate for a different accommodation, but I had to do it all on my own. And thankfully, the professor was very receptive. I sat down in his office because I had failed his class once and I was on the verge of failing it a second time because, with all due respect, this class was really, really difficult. It was an ethics class in telecommunications, and there are so many gray areas in ethics with telecommunications, with journalism, with television in general. And I remember, for me, for some reason or another, the online tests were just anxiety inducing for me. I felt like I could barely breathe getting through a test. I was able to do other online tests just fine, but for some reason with his, I could not do it. And I remember going to him one day because I was failing and I was like, "Look, I don't know how I'm going to be able to pass your class." And I was wondering if it was okay for me to just have like a hard copy of the test so that way I could look through every single question. Because with the online tests, I don't know about you, Conrad, but the online test that I had to take, it was one question at a time. And it was the way that he had it set up. And for me,
Did it not let you go back?
no, I couldn't
That
go back.
that okay, that would do a different type of thing because I'm the type of person that if I'm taking a test, I will hop around.
Yeah, see, I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that with this class. And so I remember going to him and being like, I can't do this. Like, I'm failing your test. I'm failing your class because I cannot seem to figure out these questions. And once I answer the questions, they're gone. And so that being said, he actually was like, okay, like I understand where you're coming from. I didn't necessarily tell him that I was autistic. I didn't think I needed to, but and some professors probably would have been like, well, why? But anyways, he was very receptive to that. He could see that I was clearly struggling, but he could also see how hard I was trying in his class. And after that, I was able to pass his class. I did end up getting, I think, like a C plus in the class after the two times that I took it. But it was thanks to that professor for being very accommodating and for being very receptive. And and yeah, we need to have more people who are like that in our college classrooms. We need to have more professors who are more mindful about what people with disabilities really need.
Agreed. And that brings up the topic of like during the application process. Yes, you have to go through your SAT. Um, Granted, back when I did it, there was only two sections of it. I know it's at least three parts now. Um, there's also the, picking the college application fees, sending the applications, doing personal statements, and brings the question of do you disclose right away or not?
Yeah. See, I didn't. I did not disclose right away. And the reason why I didn't disclose right away for me was because I kind of went through high school just feeling like I didn't have to. And, I didn't feel like I needed the services. But that being said, now I'm a lot more open about, being I'm very upfront about being autistic. And it's because of the fact that I feel like for me, now I feel like I can really make an impact and be able to trying to think of like the best way to say this. Um I guess like for me I didn't feel like I needed to disclose. I didn't feel like I needed the services and that I was going to be fine. If I really and I didn't end up struggling, but had I started to struggle then I think I would have disclosed. Did you end up disclosing when you were first doing your college applications?
I wasn't diagnosed.
Oh my gosh. So you couldn't disclose.
No, I had nothing to disclose.
I was 3 years old when I was diagnosed with autism, and you would have thought like, oh, she would have done that. I didn't feel like I needed to. And thank goodness I didn't really struggle in college in the academic sense, but at the same time, had I struggled or maybe like had things happen in college, I probably would have disclosed. I think looking back, I probably would have disclosed just so that way like people could be aware of like, if I do have that test anxiety, like I was explaining to my one professor, they could come from a place of understanding as opposed to well, if you need this, then everyone else is gonna need that too, you know?
If you're trying to do an application and you need help with the application process or accommodations for the interviews, please disclose. Like they
Yeah.
are there to help you. You have that right to have a reasonable adjustment to the application process. For me, later on, after I got my diagnosis and applying to the school I'm at now, like I was very open about my diagnosis, partly because of how it changed my life, but also in like how it reflected to what I'm trying to do with my life and like talking about things I've struggled with. It's all related to those things and it's part of who I am now. Granted, it always has been. It's just now more apparent and has a name. In regard to personal statements, if it is indeed related to like what you're trying to do or your journey through school or life, and it's something that is very core to that journey, then by all means talk about it.
Yeah.
But you don't have to.
I grew up with a lot of shame around my autism diagnosis up until about high school. And even though I didn't disclose about being autistic, it wasn't because of shame for me. And I think that choice is still just as valid as feeling shame behind being diagnosed as autism and having an autism diagnosis on your back. You know, I really do believe that. And, if you feel like you don't need to disclose, don't feel like you have to do it just because you have the diagnosis. Do it if you feel like you really need to disclose or have certain accommodations. Or if you feel like that's just a part of you that you really want to express. That's definitely something that I would advise.
Yeah. And the school doesn't need to know until you're actually in the school. And that usually goes specifically with the disability department. And it's usually kept confidential anyway. So, like, usually when disability department sends out like your accommodations for your classes, they don't tell the teacher, oh, they're autistic or they have ADHD. They're just, okay, these are the things that will help them in class that they are entitled to. That's it. No explanation. And the teacher has to follow it, period.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's a lot more private in college unless you are very open to talk about it, like I was.
Even though I didn't feel like I needed to disclose and I needed those accommodations, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't request for accommodations and you shouldn't disclose. Disclosing does actually protect you. Think about it. If you are somebody who is in a class with 150 students, first of all, you can already imagine that's a lot of people in the classroom. But what if you're having to take this class and you are finding that it's very hard to concentrate because of the noise level? By disclosing, you might be able to have accommodations like, for example, noise canceling headphones, or maybe something that you can fidget with. Or if you feel like you need to pace back and forth in the back of the classroom, that is an accommodation. So when you do disclose, you are protected. You do have the guarantee to be able to do the things that, you need to do because those accommodations are helpful for you. So even though I chose not to disclose, I put myself at a risk in a way. Um, and even though my teacher was very receptive to what I needed, he didn't have to do that because I didn't disclose. So it's really important that if you feel like you need those accommodations, that you do disclose so that way you can be protected.
Yeah, it holds the school more liable to what you need. Uh, like if you need, say, you're getting very overstimulated and stressed, and so it's putting you behind on your, assignments. Uh, the accommodations would allow you to request extra time, an extension beyond any extenuating circumstances a normal student would be allowed because of your accommodations. And if you don't have those, if you didn't disclose, then you better have a really, really good reason why you need that extension, or a professor doesn't have to give it to you.
You better be as persuasive as possible. I mean, in my case, I was apparently very persuasive, but that being said, I didn't disclose. My professor could have said, well, if you need this, if you're going to come to me, then that means anybody can come to me. And I'm really eternally grateful to that professor that they took the time to not only meet with me, but to actually be receptive to what I needed. He did not have to do that because I chose not to disclose. So that's why if you feel like you need accommodations, you do need to disclose it.
And that concludes our episode on college admissions and general college advice. And tune in next time when we talk about giving advice to our younger selves and how to survive.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for listening today.
Bye.